On the early evening of November 24, 2019, at around 5:15 p.m, Owen Boylan stood in the front garden of his home on Clonshock Avenue, unaware that death was closing in. He had been formally warned by Gardaí that his life was in danger, and he was advised to leave the area for safety. He only left for one night. A gunman emerged, while a getaway driver idled nearby. In an instant, the silence was shattered. Gunshots ripped through the air, striking Boylan in the arm, chest, and upper body. He was just 22. By day he delivered post. By night, he moved drugs through Coolock's underworld. He wasn't a kingpin, but he was tied to those who were. Boylan had once been close to Zack Parker, Shaun and Jordan Davis, three young men caught in a blood-soaked gang feud that defined 2019. Owen Boylan's murder was the final act in a brutal chain of killings that rocked Dublin in 2019. Known to his friends as Fishy, he became yet another casualty of the Coolock Feud, a vicious turf war between drug dealers in the North Dublin suburb. That year, Coolock was extremely dynamic, code for volatile, and deadly. The area was a tangled web of violent criminals, each with ties to separate but interconnected gang conflicts across the city. Most were young men, many fueled by cocaine, their tempers short and their method of settling disputes swift and unforgiving. A bullet. Adding to the chaos, a growing crack cocaine epidemic swept through Dublin's urban areas, tightening its grip on Coolock. Despite lockdown restrictions, the violence raged on. Shootings, stabbings, and intimidation tactics played out within a mere 5-kilometre radius. The bloodshed had started months earlier, when 23-year-old Zack Parker was gunned down, the first domino in a series of killings that would leave Coolock stained with violence. Parker had a past with drugs, but he tried to leave it behind, rebuilding his life as a barber. Those who knew him spoke of a likeable, decent young man. He wasn't on the radar of Garda units hunting Dublin's major drug figures, but someone else had him in their sights. On the evening of January 17, 2019, Parker got behind the wheel of his car in a gym car park in Swords, a passenger beside him. As he pulled out, a gunman emerged and opened fire. Bullets ripped through the vehicle, hitting both men. The attack was swift, ruthless. This wasn't a warning, it was an execution. Parker took the brunt of the gunfire, struck with deadly precision. By the time emergency services arrived, it was too late. He was pronounced dead at the scene, while his passenger was rushed to the hospital. As his body lay motionless outside the gym, Gardaí scrambled to piece together the motive. Though he had no known ties to organised crime, investigators believed Parker had fallen back into low-level drug dealing, racking up debts to the Gucci gang, a ruthless crew led by a young criminal known as Mr. Flashy, operating under the notorious Kinahan Cartel. Parker had reportedly secured a small quantity of drugs on credit from the Finglas operation, but before he could sell them, authorities intercepted the stash, and in Gangland Island, that debt was still his to pay. Mr. Flashy and the Gucci gang made it clear. Debts weren't forgiven. But what they didn't anticipate was the domino effect this execution would trigger. Parker's murder set off a chain reaction. Retaliation killings followed, dragging more people into a spiralling feud. Coolock and Darndale had always been crime hotspots, but a new generation of reckless gangsters made the streets even deadlier. The rise of crack houses fueled addiction, petty crime, and violent turf wars. Beneath it all, gangs fought for control, leaving a growing trail of bodies behind. At the heart of the violence was the Gucci gang, a Finglas-based crew operating under the Kinahan Cartel's umbrella. Leading the group was David Glenn Ward, better known as Mr. Flashy, alongside his associates Scott Capper and Kaylan Smith. Ward had started as a bagman for the Kinahans before making his power play to take control of Finglas in 2017. Unlike the older, more discreet crime syndicates, this new wave of gangsters craved attention. They flaunted their wealth online, posting photos of luxury cars, designer clothes, and wads of cash. But beneath the flashy exterior, the gang was anything but stable. Internal betrayals, unpaid debts, and shifting alliances kept tensions high. One key player in the Coolock Feud was Shaun, an ambitious drug dealer who had carved out a foothold in Dublin's booming cocaine trade. Well connected, particularly to junior Kinahan members, he had access to large quantities of drugs, fueling his rise. Though not yet at the top, his growing influence made him a force to be reckoned with in North Dublin's underworld. Zack Parker was one of Shaun Little's closest associates and longtime friends. Their drug trade profits funded lavish trips to Dubai, expensive cars, and designer wardrobes. By late 2018, tensions between rival gangs in North Dublin were reaching a breaking point. Shaun Little's expanding drug network was starting to encroach on the territories of more established criminals, including Jonathan Gill, better known as Mr. Big, who controlled much of Coolock's drug trade. This encroachment created friction, and Little's rise in influence was seen as a direct threat, not just by Mr. Big, but also by other members within the Gucci gang. When Zack Parker found himself drowning in debt, it sent shockwaves through an already unstable underworld. His financial troubles, rumoured to be as high as €200,000, though some suggest much less, only worsened the tensions. Regardless of the amount, it was money Parker didn't have, and in Gangland, unpaid debts often come with a fatal price. No one felt the loss more than Shaun Little, who'd just lost his closest friend and business partner. Instead of backing down, he vowed revenge, making it clear he wanted blood for Parker's killing. This thirst for retaliation deepened existing fractures within the gang. One side, led by Little and his associates, felt betrayed by the lack of response and began questioning the loyalty of their own leadership. On the other side stood the faction still loyal to Mr. Flashy, widening a divide that would soon explode into all-out violence. For months, Shaun Little had been watching his back, openly vowing to avenge Zack Parker's murder. But in Dublin's underworld, talk like that was a death sentence. Retaliation was inevitable. 5 months after Parker's execution, it was Little's turn. On May 21, 2019, the 22-year-old was lured to an isolated roadway in Balbriggan, just off the M1 motorway in North County Dublin. There, he was brutally assaulted and shot twice, once in the chest and once in the head. His body was dumped beside a burning black Opel Insignia, left exposed on the desolate roadside. It was a cold, calculated execution, a message to anyone who dared cross the killers. Little's murder sent shockwaves through Coolock, escalating an already volatile feud into all-out war. Despite his ties to Mr. Flashy, suspicion soon fell on Caitlin Smith, one of Flashy's closest associates. Adding to the unease was Hamid Sanambar, an Iranian who'd worked as Little's driver. Both men appeared at a crime scene in Walshestown hours after Little was shot, standing alongside Little's devastated father. But beneath the grief, tensions were boiling over. Less than 24 hours later, the bloodshed continued, as Jordan Davis, Little's closest friend, was gunned down. On May 22, 2019, around 4 p.m, Davis was walking down Marigold Road in Darndale, pushing his 4-month-old son in a buggy. Just 10 minutes before his death, he had posted a tribute to Shaun Little on Facebook, sharing a photo of him together with the caption, "Rest in paradise, you were a gent." As Davis walked with his infant son, he spotted a gunman approaching. Witnesses later recalled that he immediately realised what was happening, quickly turning and running in an attempt to escape. The gunman chased him down, shooting him multiple times. Davis collapsed to the ground, while his baby remained unharmed in the buggy. The killer then cycled away from the scene, leaving the 22-year-old bleeding out just yards from Our Lady Immaculate National School, where parents picking up their children were left in stunned disbelief. The timing of Davis's death raised suspicions among authorities. His murder occurred just minutes after posting about Little, making it almost impossible to dismiss as a mere coincidence. An anonymous account even mocked him in the comments under his tribute. His killing was seen as a continuation of the violent feud that had begun with Parker's execution. One theory suggested that, like Parker, Davis was murdered over an unpaid drug debt. He had been deeply involved in the local drug trade, part of a network that included both Parker and Little. Authorities suspected that Davis owed money to the same Kinahan-linked Gucci gang that had orchestrated Parker's killing. Some sources claimed his debt had reached as high as €70,000, an amount he couldn't realistically repay. In the weeks leading up to his death, a known enforcer had been pressuring him for repayment. Whatever the motive, the pace of the killings had spiraled out of control. In just 1 week, 3 murders had occurred. The Gucci gang was falling apart, paranoia was at an all-time high, and trust within the group was rapidly disintegrating. Soon, violence escalated to a new level. 7 days after Shaun Little's execution, friends and family gathered at the Little household for the wake. Among the attendees was Hamid Sanambar, a surprising presence given the rumours that had been circulating since Little's murder. Gardaí believed he was attending the wake in an attempt to show he wasn't involved in the ongoing feud. However, Sanambar was a hitman for hire, with no clear loyalty to any one gang. In the past, the Kinahan cartel had enlisted him to carry out acts of intimidation, and Gardaí suspect he's linked to several murders across the state. If Sanambar had any loyalty at all, it would have to be his main employers, the Kinahan cartel. The Gucci gang in Finglas was essentially a subcell of the cartel, designed with meticulous care to ensure that no individual within it had enough information to cooperate with authorities if they chose to turn informant. In the aftermath of Shaun's death, Sanambar had spent time at the little household, seemingly aligning himself with the grieving family. But his actions in the lead up to the killing raised suspicions, and some believed he had double-crossed Little. Despite the growing suspicions surrounding him, Sanambar walked into the house and paid his respects as though nothing was amiss. Whether he was there out of genuine solidarity or simply to gauge the atmosphere remains unclear. As he left the house, however, he was ambushed. Stepping into the driveway, he was met by 3 masked gunmen who were waiting for him. Armed and ready, they opened fire without hesitation. Sanambar was shot multiple times in the head and chest, collapsing in the little family's garden. He died almost instantly. The attackers then fled the scene in a Toyota Avensis, which was later found burned out. Originally from Iran, Hamid Sanambar had come to Ireland seeking asylum and was eventually granted permission to stay. Over time, he became immersed in the criminal underworld, forging connections with various gangs, including factions linked to the Kinahan cartel. Although older than many of the younger gang members he interacted with, he had firmly embedded himself in Dublin's gang scene, often seen alongside figures tied to the Gucci gang. Sanambar had earned a reputation as a violent enforcer, a man tasked with carrying out dirty work for higher-ranking criminals. He was said to have spent time in Coolock and Longford before settling in Dublin, where he became further involved in gang activities. Though his reputation as a hitman for hire was widespread, much of it was fueled by fear and rumours rather than concrete evidence of his actions. In the aftermath of Shaun Little's execution, suspicions began to swirl around Caelan Smith. Authorities quickly launched a major investigation into the killing, with Smith emerging as a primary suspect. A hitman for the Kinahan cartel, Smith had a violent history and had already gained a reputation as a ruthless enforcer long before the Coolock Feud erupted. In 2017, Smith had been hired by the Kinahan cartel to kill Hutch associate James Mago Gately, who miraculously lived through the attack, and Smith fled the country, evading capture for 2 years. During his time on the run, Smith remained active in Gangland circles, moving between various factions within the Kinahan network. As the Coolock Feud intensified, his name repeatedly came up in police investigations related to contract killings, intimidation, and drug enforcement. Accused of involvement in Little's murder, Smith found himself in a precarious position, with former allies turning against him. In a bizarre attempt to clear his name, he flew to the UK for a lie detector test and shared the results on social media. However, Little's associates remained convinced that Smith had betrayed his friend over a debt owed to the Kinahan cartel. Stephen Little, Shaun's grieving father, was also convinced that Smith was responsible for the murder and plotted to take revenge. However, Stephen Little was arrested with a grand-powered G9 semi-automatic pistol and later sentenced to 6 years in prison. He admitted to possessing the weapon with the intent to kill Smith, expressing regret that he hadn't been given more time to carry out his revenge. Despite the ongoing scrutiny, Smith has never been arrested or charged in connection with Shaun Little's death. However, in 2021, he was convicted of attempted murder for the botched assassination of James Gately in 2017 and sentenced to 20 years in prison. By late 2019, the Coolock Feud had become a chaotic, uncontrollable war, one with no clear sides, only shifting alliances and escalating paranoia. The body count continued to rise, with no end in sight. Owen Boylan was next. Unlike some of the other victims, Boylan had been given multiple opportunities to escape his fate. Authorities had officially warned him that he was a marked man, even advising him to leave Dublin for his own safety. However, Boylan ignored the warnings, believing he could carry on with his life as usual. His death brought the total number of gang-related murders in Ireland that year to 10, with half of them being directly tied to the Coolock Feud. This made it the deadliest gang war of 2019. While the Coolock Feud may no longer dominate headlines as it once did, the violence it ignited continues to have a lasting impact on Dublin's underworld. That was it for today's video. What are your thoughts on today's topic? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel if you'd like to see our next videos.